Hello and welcome to the home of the Ghost Owl, and here we are with another series. This time it's focused on Warhammer the Old World. So for those that aren't aware, Warhammer the Old World is a return to the original lore and world of Warhammer Fantasy Battle before Age of Sigmar, and with it brings essentially a new game for the tabletop, but is a return to the style of Warhammer Fantasy Battle with rank and file. Now, this has been announced as being in creation right now with Games Workshop. There is currently no release date, but it certainly is expected either by the end of 2023 or the first half of 2024. So in reality, not that far away. Now, in terms of what this series is looking at, it's looking at those models that are currently available to buy that could well be expected to be part of the army books and army lists that will be used in Warhammer the Old World. Now, we do know there are new models coming, and we'll look at that when we come on to each of the factions. We'll be looking at the factions in alphabetical order, starting with those that are currently in the narrative, and then looking at those that are outside of the narrative, though we do know there are at least rules coming for every faction when the game is first released. Now, why am I doing this? Well, for people like me who are old Warhammer Fantasy Battle players that probably still have existing armies, maybe gathering dust somewhere, who haven't been keeping up to date with what's available on the web store, it's a look at what you could still buy to flesh out the armies that you already own. If you're new to Warhammer Fantasy Battle, then it's a look at, if you were going to start an army, what an army might look like, what the models might look like, and give you a chance to maybe dip in early. If you're like me, I'm a very slow painter, so this gives me a chance to buy models in advance of the game being released and have them painted and ready to play when the game does fully release. And as well, not many people are sat there with, £300, £400, £500. We don't know how big the armies are going to be to drop on an army on day one. So this does allow you to then spread the costs over buying the units over many, many months. And sort of you can buy a unit, paint it up, and next month buy a unit, and you're not having to find the money all in one go. Now, I should say everything that is in this series are personal opinions only. I have no inside knowledge. I have no relationship with Games Workshop in that way, other than being a fan of Warhammer Fantasy Battle and the lore of that game. And everything in the series is correct at the time of recording only. And I have based a lot of what I'm going to talk about on the last remaining army book that was published for the factions. Many of those will be 8th edition, but there are a few like Chaos Dwarfs and Bretonnia that didn't have 8th edition army books. Now, before we get into it, other miniatures are available. You can find, obviously, the old classic miniatures that are no longer available to buy from Games Workshop on eBay, for example. You've got other manufacturers that you can use as counts as, such as DS Vault with their sort of Crusaders and Templars and so on, Kings of War. There's also those 3D printer opportunities out there, whether you own a 3D printer and you're looking for the files, or whether you're looking for someone to do it for you. That's an option, but always remember that non-official Games Workshop models are not usually allowed to be used in their stores, at gaming tables, or in the tournaments. Also, when you're looking at the Games Workshop models on their website, check the bases. Some of these will have round bases, some of them will have square. Now, we know that they're going to be square bases, but we also know there's going to be some base size changes, so please keep that in mind when you're buying the models. And again, if a lot of times the bases you don't really care if you're just playing at home or playing in a local club, but if you are playing in tournament, you will need obviously the correct base sizes. But if you're not too fussed about making sure they're fully correct, then you've obviously, consider the fact that when you're playing a rank and file game like Warhammer Fantasy Battle was, and like the old world will be, movement trays will be a really important part. So you can mitigate a lot of the base issues with movement trays. Also, check the material. Some people really don't like fine cast, so there's still quite a lot of the old models that are dotted around that may well be fine cast, so check that out versus plastic. And if you are looking at stuff off eBay or whatever, and it's forge wheeled, that of course will be resin, so for example the Chaos Dwarves. And overall, given what we know about Warhammer the Old World, the timeline it's going to be set in, I would avoid buying named characters unless there's a nostalgia thing. There will surely be rules, even if Games Workshop doesn't do it. The fan base will provide rules for some of those characters that you might have played in the past. You can consider the timeline and maybe take a gamble on, if you look at some of the longer lived characters, whether they be demons or whatever, even elves, for example. Maybe those characters will make an appearance. But with a new game, with a new timeline, I can certainly expect that we might see a few new named characters put in. Though, of course, as always, you can use these named characters as accounts as. So if you had Karl Franz, the Emperor of the Empire, for example, on his Griffin, there's no reason you couldn't use him as a general on Griffin if that option was available. So that is essentially the intro of why we're doing it and some of the considerations that you need to consider while we go through each of these videos. But without further ado, let's go and look at the next faction. So next up is the Tomb Kings of Khemri, one of my favourite factions and one of the ones that I was gutted when I found out the faction was going away, which at the time I thought was for good. So I was absolutely immensely happy to find out that not only was there going to be rules brought back in Warhammer the Old World, but it was also a faction that was inside and part of the narrative. And we've already had some tease of some new Tomb Kings models that may well be on the way. That said, we're looking at the last army book that was provided for the Tomb Kings, which would have been back in the 8th edition, so the last army list there. And as before, again, we're looking at the undead, so the lords, yes, they are very long-lived, but as always, I do think you're taking a gamble if you're thinking about any of these named characters to try and pick up. None of the Tomb Kings units are currently available on Games Workshop's website, so this is very much, as with the Bretonnians, a sort of a completing the whole picture, looking at what units were available, what units might even come back, either with the current kit or in a new form, for those that are either looking to flesh out existing armies or those that have never encountered the Tomb Kings before. So when we look at the Special Lords there, you had Cetra the Imperishable, which is the picture you see on the screen there. If he is in the story, I can definitely see him being redone, especially given how important a character Cetra is. He needs definitely a better miniature than the one you see there. But you also got High Queen Khalida, Arkan the Black, and Grand Hierophant Katep. And then in terms of lords, you had a generic Tomb King and a generic Leech High Priest. Now, when we look at the special heroes, you had the Herald Nekap, you had Ramhotep the Visionary. Herald essentially is like a battle standard bearer. Ramhotep was a Necrotech, the people that build all the constructs. And then you've got Prince Apophis, who is a really nice looking model. One that, again, if I'd pick up just because I like the model. Maybe you could use him as accounts as Tomb Prince or something, but I really do like the model. He was only available in fine cast. I'm not sure he will come back, but essentially someone who is cursed and is made up of a mountain of scarabs, and you'd have to go and read his backstory to find out exactly why he looks that way, but it was a very cool looking model. In terms of heroes, there was a Tomb Prince, a Leash Priest, and the Necrotect, and then you've got the Tomb Heralds. The Tomb Heralds are who you see in that bottom picture, both mounted and on foot, carrying the army's banner. So, in terms of Tomb Kings of Khemri, now the core units, now these were pretty much the units that were kind of letting the Tomb Kings down at the end. The skeleton warriors, skeleton archers, horsemen, you can see the warriors there, the horsemen in the middle, you can see the chariots there on the left-hand side. These were the older miniatures. Then they definitely kind of needed an update. You know, there were other kits that were either new or got updates, and they were actually quite good. But these ones weren't the best. I definitely would expect them to be redone. Depending on how long it takes for the new miniatures to come out for this army, will we see some of these units come back? Quite possibly. Certainly, I wouldn't recommend using vampire counts unless you're really into converting, because the aesthetic is quite different. If you go and look at skeleton warriors or black knights, for example, for the vampire counts that currently exist, the aesthetic is very different, would require a huge amount of work, so that's not recommended. I think on this one, if you're able to pick some up through alternate means, then it's not going to hurt. There's still the Tomb King aesthetic with them, but these are certainly units I would expect to have new miniatures for at some point. When we come on to the special units, the Tomb Guard, I could absolutely see these guys coming back there. The right hand picture there, so they're essentially the elite infantry of the Tomb Kings. Necropolis Knights, also known as Snake Surfers. Some people loved them, some people hated them. I actually quite liked them. It was something different. It gave that fantasy element for me. So yeah, I thought they were quite cool. I could absolutely see these guys coming back. They were a relatively new plastic kit at the time the Tomb Kings were phased out. So yes, absolutely, I could definitely see that coming back. The Tomb Scorpion and the Ashabti. Now, I loved the Ashabti. I thought they were absolutely an excellent theme of model, but they were, along with the Tomb Scorpion, in Finecast. I think it will be interesting to see if we see any of the Finecast kits come back. I'm not sure that we will. So, you know, if they are going to bring back some old kits, I would expect them more likely to be the plastic kits as opposed to the Finecast, though never say never. So maybe we'll see the Ashabti. I really, really hope we see new Ashabti models, because I think you could do something very, very cool with them, both with the weapon you see there and also with the great bows. So yeah, I think that would be very cool to see. Tomb Swarms and Carrion, again, you know, it's like Scarab Swarm, Carrion in terms of vulture style of bird. Again, whether we'll see those come back, I think is debatable. Finally, on the rare units, and this is where we'd seen quite a few of the new plastic kits as well. So you can see bottom center there is a Khemrian War Sphinx. You could either use it as a mount for your Tomb King, or you could have it in there with a bunch of warriors with long spears. It was a very cool model, very new plastic kit, and was a joint kit with the Necro Sphinx, which is what you see on the bottom left, which was essentially a monster killer. So the War Sphinx, really good against infantry. The Necro Sphinx was absolutely a monster killer and could even potentially kill monsters in one round of combat. So I could absolutely see both of those coming back. I say it is a joint kit, it is a brand new plastic kit, so that's definitely expected. You've got the Sepulchral Stalkers, which is a joint kit with the Necropolis Knights you saw previously, the Snake Surfers. Again, I could absolutely see these guys coming back. It was a new plastic kit and being joint as well. I could definitely see it being put back out as is. The Necrolith Colossus, that was essentially like a bone giant. The model was old. I didn't particularly like it. I don't particularly see it coming back as a model. Maybe they will, but I don't see the old model coming back. And if they are going to release a Necrolith Colossus, then I could see it being something new. I always kind of felt it should have been more of a construct than just like a giant skeleton, which is what it was. The Hydra Titan, well, if you've ever played Total Warhammer, on the PC, then you'll know what this looks like. Again, it's a bit like a giant construct, but with a magic element to it. There was always such a desire for this kit to be released, and it never was. There are lots of conversions around, so you can have a hunt around for what they look like. Again, I really hope we see that model come back, because I think that would offer something really cool to a Tomb King army. But there was no miniature ever made for it. Screaming Skull catapult is what it says. It was a catapult made of bones. It threw skulls, magical skulls. So will we see that come back? Yes, as a unit. In terms of miniature, again, it's something I'd expect to see that would be new. There's nothing really that close that I would consider using. Some people might think of the Ossiarch catapult thing. I wouldn't really go down that route. It doesn't really fit the right aesthetic. And the final one there is a really cool model, which is the Casket of Souls. That's in the upper center pictures. It's a really cool idea. It's a really cool miniature. It was in Finecast. Again, I don't know if we're going to see any of these Finecast models come back. And again, it's another one that I hope is redone, because you could do something very, very cool as a centerpiece model around that, even though it is a rare unit, essentially magic coming out as a magical artillery weapon, for want of a better term. So that brings us to the Tomb Kings of Khemri. As I said, none of these models are available on Games Workshop's website. I can definitely see the newer plastic kits coming back. We'll see how much overall makes a reappearance, but I'm also expecting quite a few new kits to be released when the Tomb Kings faction is fully released within the old world. So that completes this faction. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. Let me know why in the comments down below. And if you want to see more content, then please hit that subscribe button. It's totally free for you to do, and it means a huge amount for me. So thank you for that in advance. You've been watching The Ghost Owl, and I'll see you very soon.